everyone. I'm going to start taking attendance while people are logging on really quick. So let's see, I have Brody, I have Kato. I have Cam. And David. Who's IH5792JS?
It's Patrick.
Hey, Patrick. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you. Patrick, your last name's Rietsma, right?
Yeah, I don't know why it just like has my name that
Okay, no worries. David and I think
got it.
David, yo. Okay. Okay, David, just so you know, I muted you because your background's too loud. Okay, so for the sake of time, thanks everyone for those of you who are here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I want to start by checking in. Does anybody have any questions about any of the content that was covered this week or last week? I know that there's two big topics. I know last week was about the brain. This week is about anatomy and physiology. Does anybody have any questions or need any clarification? Okay, awesome. So I'm going to continue on. Sorry. Okay, great. So this week in review, we talked about anatomy as well as physiology. I first want to just high level talk about anatomy. And I think there's like two really important things to preface in the conversation about anatomy and teaching yoga to children, which is there's certainly certain things that we need to modify in order to meet the needs of the developing body. But also at the same time that we're making modifications, I also see it as a really great opportunity to help strengthen and develop these different parts of the body that may be vulnerable to your students that you're working with. So the biggest thing that I would like to address first is the head and neck, because it pertains to a lot of the yoga poses that you do. So in asking all of you in terms of the head and the neck, why do you think that we need to be cautious of children's head and neck when practicing yoga? And I'll go ahead and just open up the floor and allow somebody to volunteer. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and pick on you. Anybody willing to share? Why do you think the head and neck we need to be particularly careful of with children's yoga?
I guess I would say that they're still developing, and that it's like the first thing it develops in them. So like their head is bigger compared to the rest of their body as far as like developmentally. And so that's just probably the biggest thing that we need to protect. Like, and this week's we talking about like forward folds and back bends. You got to protect them just in certain ways like that.
Nice, thanks, Patrick. That's absolutely right. So just naturally, we're born with this really big head. The head is there to protect us, essentially, to protect the brain. And so one thing that we need to be cautious of is that the neck can actually be quite weak in comparison to the weight of the brain, and also just where children are at developmentally, they may not have a lot of awareness over the neck. And thanks, Patrick, that was my second question to it, was like, so then what do we need to be cautious of? Which there's two major things you need to be cautious of, which is forward bends and backward bends. And the reason that we need to be And like in terms of modification, so I'm going to ask again the question to all of you, which is, if we know that the neck is weak in comparison to the head, how do you need to modify things when you're going from a forward fold back up to standing? Does somebody want to, oh, sorry, let me unmute you all. Okay. Oh, you're unmuted. Okay. Does anybody want to answer that question? How do you modify a forward fold in order to protect the vulnerable neck? Patrick, do you want to answer that question for everyone?
You said, how would I prevent what in the forward fold?
So how do you need to cue a student from coming up from a forward fold in order to protect the neck? What's something that you could do? Thank you, Michael. Michael's helping you out, Patrick. You can give him a high five when you see him in person. Keep the chin to the chest. That's absolutely right. So just think about like a car accident and the fulcrum of the neck. That really backwards to forwards move is really aggressive. And so think a young child, especially if they have spirited energy, they can come from a forward fold, quickly come up, whip their head back. Two things, it could be tough on the neck. Also, too, frankly, it could make them feel dizzy. So tucking the chin to the chest always on the exit of a forward fold is super important. The other thing that's really important is going from backwards back up. So back bending poses, like something like maybe camel pose, bridge pose, you need to really protect the neck. So again, what's a way that you could modify, or especially when you first start teaching back bends to students, in order to protect the vulnerability? Knowing that if the head drops back, it may be difficult to get up. How would you modify that? Michael, do you want to give that one a go again?
That one, actually, I'm not really 100% sure about.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. Keep your chin neutral. So especially as they build body awareness, so rather than dropping the head back like this, just keeping the chin neutral. So like if I'm gonna go into like rainbow pose, even just like a subtle seated back bend, rather than dropping my head back, I'm gonna keep my chin neutral. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Cool, thanks. Okay. Also to the spine, so this kind of just follows along the lineage of the relationship of the neck and the spine. Also just being cautious that the spine is also vulnerable in children. So being aware, again, of forward fold back bends is important for the spine. What's going on with the chest with children that you need to be aware of? Especially this is like with your little ones. Any ideas? So if you've ever noticed, have you ever seen like a baby who has a really distended belly, or young children? The stomach begins to lengthen, like as the spine begins to lengthen, and so sometimes their equilibrium is off. So being aware and balancing poses of modifying. So let's talk about tree pose. Commonly tree pose, you see that in photos, or students are used to it and they want to put their foot up to their inner thigh or to their inner calf muscle, and they don't have the development yet to do that. So what's a way, which also too, given the length of the abdomen, can make them kind of wobbly? What's a modification that you could give in tree pose in order to keep them more stable? Anybody willing to give it a go? What about Cade?
I would say like the kickstand.
Yeah, awesome. So kickstanding the foot, keeping the toe on the ground is a really great modification. Awesome. Next up is the limbs. So something that I think is really important to reiterate, and we talked about this, Julia talked about this week to you in the lecture, which is that is about the long bones, and that the bones actually aren't fused in young children. So if you think of it like this, the bones are like this, and then over time as they grow together, and then they fuse. So when they fuse, they become a lot stronger. But when they're young and they're open like this, what do you think that your bones then are prone to do with a lot of force on them? Michael, Cam, anybody? Break, exactly. So like super common injuries in young children is right here in the collarbone, not breaking because it's not fused together yet. You get a lot of arm breaks, really simple things. Like I've shared with you all that I have a 7-year-old son, nearly 7-year-old son. He was like walking on like a small easement, and he just flipped over and got his arm just right and like snapped his bone in half. Not because he's weak or he's not strong, because just simply that those bones aren't fused together. And so they're likely to break. So something you need to be cautious of is like rowdy energy, especially when doing a lot of weight-bearing poses, maybe could break a bone. But also at the same time, yoga is also really good. Like think about downward facing dog. It's a weight-bearing activity to also help to increase the bone strength on bones that may be a little bit weaker. Okay. What else do we have? Awesome. And then we talk about alignment. So one of the things that I always like to note, if any of you do adult yoga, they talk a lot about being in alignment. Just given naturally what we're talking about, you know, the belly being more smaller, more distended, the neck being weaker. Alignment, like lifting the ear off of the shoulder in triangle pose, is something they're learning how to do. So you might see a triangle pose that kind of looks like this. Bringing awareness to it over time, they'll get that strength to lift up, but just recognizing that right away, poses just naturally in young children aren't going to look like they are in adults. And remember that we're trying to get them to feel comfortable and confident in their bodies. So really getting nitpicky about alignment when it's not possible can feel defeating to young children. So that's why I talked in the few lectures before about just a lot of verbal adjustments. And obviously you want to fix alignment if somebody's, you know, going to hurt themselves, but otherwise trusting that in time, as they get more confident and comfortable and strong in their body, that then their alignment will come together. Any questions about anatomy? Cool. So the next section that we're going to move on to is the musculoskeletal. So we're going to get into the physiology. Anybody remember how many bones you're born with and how many bones you end up with? If you can tell me, I'll send you a Yoga Ed t-shirt. How many bones do you start off with? Anybody want to guess? You can type it in the chat. Okay. I'll give you another. Oh, who's going?
Is it 300?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, close. Anybody else just want to guess it?
362.
No. 270. How many? And I'll give you another opportunity. So you start off with 270 and you typically end with around 206. If you can answer why, then I'll send you a Yoga Ed t-shirt.
Bones fused together.
There you go, Cam.
Hey, let's go.
What size are you?
Medium.
Okay, do you want red or gray?
Gray.
Cam. Medium gray. I'll send it to Dr. Felix. He'll give it to you.
Awesome.
Okay. So just know that over time, as those bones fuse together, that's why you get smaller. So that hopefully keeps with you so that you can understand the vulnerability of young people's bones. So like I said, pointing to bone strength, one thing you guys are probably getting there maybe at your college age. I always laugh now that I'm closer towards 40, that my mom used to say things like, oh, well, when you're older, you'll be happy that I had you do this or that sort of stuff. So this kind of falls into alignment about bone strength, which is, I'll send somebody else a t-shirt if they can answer this. When do you meet max density of your bones? What age?
25.
No.
24.
No.
30.
Who's that?
Me.
Brody. What color, what size?
Red XL.
XL, you got it. 30, okay? So you don't have that long to get strong bones. Without strong bones, common things that you see are like the hunchback people, osteoporosis, that sort of stuff. So what's awesome about yoga is it's a weight-bearing activity that also doesn't really do deterioration. Like you guys probably know, like people who like overlift weights maybe stunt their growth, that sort of stuff. For females, typically what will happen is like over-exercise leads to like slow development in terms of like getting their period, their breast growing, etc. And so yoga is a really great way to do a weight-bearing activity without being really aggressive. So we talked about that last week too, why yoga can be great is it's like an outlet of another way for people to have successes in physical activity, PE class. In terms of the muscular system, we've had a lot of research done on our program. We did a really cool program at a school in South Central LA. They looked at our control were the students, who took PE class over the course of 3 years. And then we looked at average district means, and the students who participated in yoga with us had significant gains in upper body strength compared to other school districts that were just doing standard PE. What's also great about a practice of yoga, especially think about athletes, is that it also inspires flexibility in muscles. Given that we're more and more sedentary, doing a lot of seated activities, kids are in front of games, getting less activity, muscles just typically aren't as flexible as they used to be. So yoga is a great way to help with flexibility. I always like to say, people will say to me like, oh, Bryn, I'm not flexible, I can't do yoga. I'm like, well, that's why you're doing it. So something to think about with your students. Something that's really important to me is talking to you all about the nervous system. The nervous system is typically what houses a lot of our stress and our anxiety. Inside of your nervous system, you have the autonomic nervous system, and that encompasses the central nervous system, which runs from your brain down your spine, and then your peripheral nervous system, so everything that shoots out into your system. Within the autonomic nervous system, you have two really important systems that I want to draw attention to, and that's your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. So I'm going to let you guys have another chance at a t-shirt, which is, can anybody tell me what the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system are also commonly referred to as?
I know it if no one else does.
Oh, Cam's going to get a bag too. Hey, Cam, you're getting all the yoga ed swag. Go for it. What's the autonomic?
Yeah.
The parasympathetic is responsible for what?
Is that also
Oh, sorry, let's go sympathetic. What's sympathetic?
Sympathetic would be fight or flight.
Yeah.
And then parasympathetic would be rest and digest.
Awesome. Good job. So what do you think that students are commonly in? Rest and digest or fight or flight?
Probably rest and digest.
Where do you hang out with kids?
Got a little sister.
Okay. Lucky her that she's relaxed. The truth is that kids are typically in heightened states of fight or flight, which is your sympathetic, so S and S. And so this like can be as simple, and so maybe you're just also it's like unassuming, like doing a lot of electronics really gets you amped up in your SNS system. Listening to people lecture like this talk is probably maybe getting you into your SNS. What we know is that a little bit of fight or flight is good, right? So like if the door were to fly open in front of me and a guy had a gun and I'm going to either run or I'm going to punch him, like that's good. It keeps me safe. But what isn't good about fight or flight and when it becomes toxic is that if that door keeps opening in front of me and there's a man there with the gun, right? And like that constant reaction. And so what we can happen for people is they can get on what we like to say like the stress feedback loop or the hamster wheel, and it's really difficult to get off. And so where this might happen to all of you is just like going to school all day. Like you might have 5 classes, 4 classes in one day. You get home, you do your schoolwork, and then you get into bed and you're so exhausted, and then all of a sudden you're like super solar lying there thinking about your to-do list. That's like an overactive sympathetic nervous system. And what's really cool about yoga is that it actually takes you from that sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic nervous system, into rest and digest, and it can do it quite quickly. So can anybody here share with me, like, what's one thing, like if you were lying in bed at night, that example, and your head was racing, what's one simple thing that you've learned from yoga that would bring you into your parasympathetic nervous system that you could do? I'll give you a clue. It's a breathing exercise.
Balloon breath.
Nice, exactly. So balloon breath interrupts that fight or flight, takes you really deep into the belly, because when we're in fight or flight, breath is quite shallow, takes you deeper. So think about this also for those of you who are working with athletes. Like they do a really hard training session. They're in that up tempo of the fight or flight. You want to restore their muscles. So doing some breathing exercises, more restorative yoga poses is going to bring them down into that rest and digest. And theoretically, this like can help with tight muscles, better sleeping, all of that sort of stuff. Does anybody have any questions about the nervous system? Okay. So one thing that I always recommend is like, share this with your students. Explain to them what is fight or flight, what is rest and digest. How can you recognize when you're in this state? Like what are examples that they can use, and what are things that you can do in order to calm your body can be really helpful for students. Next up, we have the cardiovascular system. Oh, and one more thing. A lot of people who do yoga tend to sleep better because it's mixed with levels of intensity and then bringing it down. So like the more energizing to the lower allows people to have better sleep. Cardiovascular, one thing to just note about this is that a children's heart can beat very fast during exercise in order to accommodate for their increased cardiovascular and respiratory demand. So in an adult yoga class, or like one of those heated yoga classes that you may go to, like they might do a lot of really strong poses over a 30-minute time frame and never give adults a rest. It's because at a cardiac level, adults can handle that. It's important to know that the uptake of children is less. So they're going to tire quicker, recover easier. So it's important that you give them ample periods of rest throughout. So like sometimes I notice in a yoga class, like if I do sun salutes with kids, that they'll be like, I need a break, or I want to get a drink of water, and I'll honor that. Like, okay, have a sip of water, take child's pose or rock pose, rest for a moment, and then we're going to go on. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, awesome. Respiratory system. So respiratory tissues fully mature by 8 years old, but your lungs never stop growing. That's just like an interesting fact that I like to share. One thing to also note is that children naturally have more compliant lungs than adults do, due to like the thicker thoracic muscles, the muscles around in it, which then means that it might be more difficult for them to take in their breath. So that kind of also goes with the heartbeat along with taking in the breath. So giving adequate periods of rest when they need it. Okay, somebody else has an opportunity for a t-shirt. What happens, like physiologically, anatomically in the body when you take an inhale and an exhale? So when you inhale, the rib cage does what?
Expands.
Okay, and what happens to the diaphragm?
The opposite.
So expands and it
Oh, it goes down.
goes down. Okay, and then when you exhale, what happens to the rib cage?
It goes back to normal. So
Yeah, it contracts, right? And what happens to the diaphragm?
goes back up.
Okay, sorry, who's talking?
Cade.
Cade, awesome. Did you already get a t-shirt, Cade?
No.
Oh, look at you. What color, what size?
Gray, large.
Okay. So that can be really helpful, honestly, that people know, because people actually think it's the opposite way. So a breathing exercise that's really helpful for your students is that feeling breath, and you can actually teach them about their body and what's going on. As you inhale, your rib cage expands, your diaphragm moves down. As you exhale, the rib cage contracts and the diaphragm moves up. In your teacher's guide on 50, there's a really nice graph. Like, I'll take that visual picture in and show it to students. It's a really good anatomy lesson, and it falls into PE standards as well for them. Urinary system, not a lot going on here. Continence, though, is a big issue. I always like to clarify, people think that potty training is about getting a kid to sit on the toilet and go pee, which is part of it. But really what you're teaching a child to do is make a muscle stronger and hold their muscle for longer so they don't pee their pants. I can't tell you, I have numbers of stories that I could entertain you all with about boys and girls peeing on yoga mats. We talked about this in developmental milestones last week or the week before. Make sure that you go to the bathroom before class, wash your hands. Don't doubt young kids that they have to go to the bathroom, even if 3 of them say, because it's super embarrassing for the student who pees on the mat, and it's disgusting for you, the yoga teacher, that has to deal with picking up a mat that's covered in pee and making that quick transition to try not to embarrass them in front of the rest of the class. Also, just in terms of dehydration, young kids get thirsty. They naturally, doing PE, they typically want water. If they want it during yoga, make a designated drink time for them. And then we talk about the digestive system. There's not a whole lot going on here, except that yoga has a lot of evidence behind helping with digestive health, which is nice and helpful. Reproductive system, we don't get really into that until we talk about adolescence, is the truth. And this is a children's course that you are all on. One thing is just because I want to say it, because some of you did tell me in the beginning you want to work with teenage students. One of the questions that comes up, which honestly I know I have a bunch of dudes on the call, but it's good for you all to know, girls who have their periods might not want to practice yoga. And so giving them an option of something else to do if that's so. A lot of PE still is separated by sexes, but sometimes it's not. And the other thing is just recognizing, especially your 4th to 5th grade. The truth is now 4th and 5th grade girls are getting their periods. But also to recognizing, just being aware, especially with your older girls, they might not want to lie on their chest as their breasts are starting to develop because it can be uncomfortable. So you need to have your eyes on the room and notice that. And maybe if you're teaching a 4th and 5th grade class and you have young girls, you're just going to eliminate poses like cobra pose and shark pose because you just want to avoid it altogether. That's also reasonable. One thing too is just being cautious of partner poses and how they engage, that due to those developmental changes, it's definitely opportunity to teach them how to engage with one another, but also can be uncomfortable for them. So being aware of And then lastly, the immune system. So what's awesome about yoga is that it overall allows us to feel not only healthy and well in our physical body, but also in our mental, emotional body. Stress and chronic stress can take a deep toll on our physical body as well as our mental body. And so yoga is a really great way. I like to say like, it's like wellness, like personal hygiene. It helps with our physical, but also with our mental. So mental hygiene is always great as well. And I believe that's it. Does anybody, yep, that's all the systems. Does anyone have any questions on anatomy or physiology? Okay. So this week you got the anatomy worksheet as well as the physiology worksheet. Feel free to go through and fill it out. It's a good activity. It's going to, I know for the physiology, it gives the different systems and then it asks you to tell the differences, like a difference between adult and children, as well as the benefit of yoga. Like I said, the more that you can build mastery in the yoga, the easier it is for you to teach it. If you have any questions on it, feel free to email me. Does anyone, so today's a short class, and I don't have anything else to talk about unless any of you have any questions. Does anyone have any questions for me? Okay, awesome. Thanks guys for being here. So just to clarify, Cam, you're gonna get a medium gray shirt. Cody, you'll get a red XL, and Cade, you'll get a gray L. I'll go ahead and let Dr. Felix know that I'm putting him in the mail for all of you and for him to give you them next class that you have with him.
Thank you.
Thanks guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, talk to you soon.